I had serious trouble with addictions, and I mean bad. How I'm alive today, I have no idea. I should have died. I've done more drugs. I hit like Robert Downey Jr. level, and I'm not proud of that. When I finally treated and I learned and I read a million books, when I saw the nervous system, I go, whoa, this makes sense. I think for what we suffer from chaos addiction. And when everyone's telling you it's in your head, I would argue that I knew, you know, and you know, it's not in your head, it's in your body. You can feel that there's something else there that's present. What we're saying is essentially that it starts in childhood. So the childhood is chaotic. For whatever reason, you could have an alcoholic parent, you could have a narcissistic parent, you could have a parent with mental health issues. Basically, a chaotic childhood. Once that condition and that environment is present, a child's brain rewires itself to be calm in chaos because it's got to survive. I'll tell you what pisses me off. And again, I don't give a fuck. This is ridiculous. And the military should be embarrassed by what I'm about to say. What's crazy is that the system hasn't recognized that the system reinforces self-destruction. We are designed and trained and indoctrinated to constantly give to the group and sacrifice and self-destruct for the group and never take away from it, never ask for anything, never be a moment's problem to the group, always give, never take. We are bred that way. And then one day they go, oh yeah, now you should be the 180-degree opposite. Oh my God, he didn't talk to anyone for help. Yeah, no fucking shit, dude. That's what you bred into us. And that mask that I had created, that identity, that destroyer mask that I'd been wearing for years, that died the day that I got hurt. And then I had to go, all right, I'm not that. And then I went, well, who am I?
Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's both an honor and a pleasure to welcome my next guest to the podcast. He was originally on episode 121, which is December of 2022. It's currently the Mic Drop's second most listened to episode, by the way. So
until now,
it was a big hit. As an actor, director, producer on a CBS hit show, SEAL Team, which we did talk about last time, but we'll get into a little bit more today. And a SEAL in Suicide Squad. Much to his dismay, he was a CAG guy and not a real SEAL. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Tyler Gray and Lauren Ungeldi. And I guess to kind of clarify from an intro standpoint, obviously we've already had Tyler on. Yeah. Lauren's been on with other authors that we've had on and has co-authored a number of books of guests that have been really, really successful shows of ours. And she collaborated with him and would you call it co-wrote?
Yeah.
Co-wrote his new book, which we're going to dive into, which really dovetails on to a lot of the discussion that we had towards the end of the show when you were on the first time, which really, really resonated enormously. And to me, within the veteran space, with it being such an integral part of the listenership of this show and the communities that we both are from and continue to kind of surround ourselves with. I can't think of a better duo to come represent the work that you guys have been doing in the veteran space, specifically with the struggles of transitioning out of military service into civilian life and the lack of purpose. And I think from my perspective, some of the biggest misconceptions of PTS and what it's derived from, why it's there, how to work through it and all of that. So I'm really excited. I know the listeners are really excited to kind of dive deep into all of the things that you guys have been doing over the last few years. And we've talked a little bit, in between that time of some of what you've had going on. But normally I ask all the lightning round questions. I did that the last time. So I really want to get right into it and just say, what have you guys been up to and kind of catch us up from the last time you were on?
Well, I'll start that just because it kind of started ish, around the time I was on the podcast. So I had been working on a book for probably 15 years. I mean, I started jotting stuff down 2009-ish. And I was just writing stuff. I didn't, first of all, I don't, she knows this. I don't think in structure. I think I'm all over the place. And so that's what the writing was. It was, I would think about this, I would write about that, think about this, and then I could be thinking about this. And then while I'm thinking about this, thinking about something else. And, it was all over the place. But more importantly, and this is going to dovetail into your show, is I knew what the book was about. I didn't have an ending. I didn't know what the end state is. And so in December 2022, as you said, I went and did a bunch of podcasts. Yours, I did Drinking Bros, I did Unsubscribed, I did Sean Ryan. Actually, no, sorry, I did Unsubscribe later. Anyways, I did 6 podcasts in 2 or 3 days, and yours is one. And it was really interesting because the feedback I got from your show and Sean's show, which I talked, I talked about it more at the end. Sean's show, I talked about kind of my childhood as well, and kind of that whole thing. And the feedback I got from people, and I've got a ton of messages, and I sent pretty much all of them to Lauren. She's read them all. It was truly unbelievable. It was shocking is the right word. How many messages said, hey, your story is exactly the same as mine. And again, obviously details are different, but the core stages, for lack of a better term, is exactly the same. I had probably 15 people, I forget the number, that said, and I'm saying the exact same quote, which is crazy to me. I had 15 people say it was like someone else describing my life. Wow. Which is a weird thing that 15 people said almost word for word the exact same thing, which I was like, that's crazy. But I'm like, that's not crazy. It's that way for a reason. And that was when, in the early 2023 is when I started realizing that's the book. That's the structure of the book. The missing piece that I hadn't figured out was I had gotten out, and I knew the problems that I had experienced since I got out. I knew the problems that all my friends and acquaintances had experienced since they got out. What I hadn't put it together with was my childhood. And when I talked about my childhood and people said, I have that exact same story. And by the way, also at Warrior's Heart, I saw the same thing. So it was when I just went, what if the problems that we're having once we get out aren't derived mainly from being in? What if they started in childhood? And once I looked at it through that lens, everything fell into place. And that's when I was like, now I know what the book is, I know what the message is, and I know what the ending is. The ending is we're looking in the wrong place. We're trying to solve, the reason the problem is not being solved because we're trying to solve it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And that's when I really aggressively started, looking for, and I'll kind of just roll into the story of how I met her. So then I was like, I need to find a co-author because I can't write this myself. I'm too scattered, even though I'd written quite a bit. And it was weird. There was just a post, and I don't know what it was about. And I just saw it, and just something in my head said, she is who you need to talk about. And again, you want to talk about fate, whatever, universe, God, I don't know, but something told me you need to talk to her about your book. And I just Instagrammed her and slid into her DMs, in a good way and professional way. And I just said, hey, I want to talk to you. I have a book. I've been trying to figure it out. And that first conversation, we talked for
3 hours at least.
3 hours. And she got it within probably within a minute of talking. And I'm not exaggerating. Probably within a minute, I just gave her a paragraph pitch. And not only did she get it, but she immediately knew. It's like I gave, this much information, and she went, oh, so that must mean boom, boom, boom. And she elevated it already to the steps, to the next steps, for lack of a better term. And then that led to, a year and a half of her and I working together for, sometimes 4 or 5 hours a day for, a year and a half.
Hey guys, I want to take a minute to tell you about the Mic Drop Patreon, where you can get the real mic drop experience the way it's meant to be seen. You get completely uncensored, unfiltered, and uncut episodes with nothing held back, just raw, real conversations directly from me to you, without YouTube censorship. Plus, you'll see it days before anyone else, with early premieres and exclusive bonus content that you won't find anywhere else. You get behind-the-scenes access to the show, including pre- and post-show footage, with me and the guest both in studio and on location, depending on what the guest is into and what we have going on. On top of that, we've got tons of Patreon-only perks, mic drop swag, access to exclusive merch, and the chance to submit your questions to be asked at the end of every episode. You'll also get a sneak peek at our upcoming guests, so you'll know who's in the studio weeks before anyone else. We're constantly releasing new features and dropping new content based on what you want to see. For our top tier members, you get the same Mic Drop Challenge coin that all of my guests receive from the upcoming show, which will never ever be for sale. We've got quarterly merch that's sent out directly to you, a monthly Zoom call with me where we talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, and an active group chat where we all shoot the shit on a daily basis. All of that for just a few bucks a month to support the show. Right now, we're also offering a 10% discount off an annual subscription, which means that you get more than a free month. I want to say thank you to everyone who has already signed up. Your support means that we get to keep bringing you the content that you love. So if you haven't yet, hit the link in the description or go to patreon.com/micdrop and join the team. I'll see you guys in there. Thank you.
I have 4 dogs, and they've eaten all types of different food. And we recently found Team Dog, I believe this spring. So we've been on it for a year. Seeger was on it first, and Tiller was on it, and then we put the Goldens on it. And I mean, all the dogs eat less food. The dogs' coats are way better. Everything about Team Dog is, I'm very impressed. My dog trainer, Justin Allen, he uses it on all 60 dogs that are there for training. He's tried every single food in the game too, and they just stay super healthy on this Team Dog.
So I guess in that, you've obviously worked with a lot of other veterans. You've heard a number of different stories that tend to parallel his experience. What was kind of the light switch moment and the connection that you made in really grasping that and kind of how to bring it all together?
Yeah. So, I've worked with warriors, as you said, a lot from the Special Forces community, and Delta Force, Green Beret, Navy SEAL, and what was interesting to me about him is that he's telling me a story, but as he's explaining it, he was one of the first people, because I had seen a lot of similarities. I had noticed, because I'm a storyteller, I'm having to spend a lot of time, I'm really listening, and I was like, there's so many patterns, there's so many similarities. He starts to talk, and we begin to understand that we're really talking about an archetype here. And we begin to chase the threads back to origin points to really understand, because it's we talk about these things. Oh, there's this, the war within taking place, or there's these, it's almost symptomatic. And so for some of the writing process, I would say I felt like we were detectives, where you need the board with that red thread and you're trying to see, where it goes. And in some parts we stopped, we were reading books to actually understand the body components, how the nervous system is rewired, how this happens. So we were writers together, but then for certain parts of it, we were like detectives and saying, how does society play a role? How would you compare warriors in this generation to that generation? What are the differences here? Why did we see spikes in, this kind of concerns and challenges happening now as compared to other times? And so, and that part is a very, we were working sometimes on the phone, 4 or 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
But I believe this is more than just a story. It's actually putting words to something, and the messages really showed that was correct, that I think something that's really going to resonate in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I felt like we were detectives searching for as yet unknown truth.
Yeah.
We were looking for the core why. We know all the symptoms. Everyone knows the symptoms. But what's the actual disease? And I personally feel that we haven't figured it out. I feel like her and I And in the book, we present what we think the disease is. And I feel like we figured it out. And detectives, she hasn't actually said that analogy before, but that's 100% correct. We literally were just like spending, we didn't write. We worked together, and I mean hours daily for 6 months before she wrote a single word.
Oh, wow.
It took a while to get in this guy's head.
Yeah, well,
There's a lot to unpack there.
but it took a while for us.
It did.
She didn't start writing until we felt like we had figured out the overarching, again, whether you use the word disease or condition or factors or the why. It's like, yeah, I know this and this.
So we were researching too, like divide and conquer. I was like, I'll read this book, you read that book.
Yeah.
If it's any good, we'll, read the parts that you need to read.
Highlight the parts.
And I say, go to chapter this, read this, and he's
scanning pages. And,
so trying to, rapidly.
Yeah.
And we read a lot of scientific.
We geeked out at this.
White papers and the whole thing. So, and actually, I think it's probably worth mentioning. What I feel like we did, if you look at, really doesn't matter whether we're talking about mental health, doesn't matter if we're talking about physical health. Doctors are specialized. Yes, you have a general practitioner, but a general practitioner is like really just a person that kind of refers you to specialists, right? Everything in mental health is the same way. Mental health therapists don't understand the nervous system. Therapists don't understand hormone levels. They deal with mental talk therapy. And again, I'm making broad generalizations here, but they have like their specialist or a specialization. And don't get me wrong, to be really good at something, you need to specialize in it to be really good at that. That being said, I feel like there should be a specialization in a person. There should be a specialization in the mental and physical health where that person is all about integration.
Yeah.
And it's about understanding. If you use the human body as an analogy as a car, which, cars infinitely better than I do, but it's like, yes, you can be a person who only works on carburetors. You can be a person who only works on fuel injection systems, but it's like, it takes somebody who truly understands the way the car and all the systems work together, the way they need to work together, and to really understand, hey, if this problem is happening, with the fuel injection system, or, it's the engine is sputtering, what are the potential causes of that? And by and large, those causes, and again, the human body is the same way. It's like you're seeing a drop in horsepower. That could be literally a million different things that are all causing it that have nothing to do with that specific specialization. Oh. So I feel like that's what we were doing, is really learning to integrate all these different fractured things into an integrated understanding of our condition.
Was there a single component throughout this process that surprised you guys the most collectively that you kind of uncovered?
I would say people talk about mind-body connection, and we kind of have an idea of what, that sounds like a yoga retreat or something. There's a term that a doctor that I work closely with talks about called psychophysiology, and actually really understanding that a lot of what we've thought is just psychological has a very real impact on the brain and nervous system. So when we got deep into it to understand, and I'm going to go ahead and say the title of the book, Forged in Chaos, that's not just a rewiring of your brain. It's not just psychological, but what we're looking at is an individual that's created an adaptation that's been forged in chaos that is very neurological, it's very physical, it's very biological. And so I think some of the conversation has been steered just towards, okay, an event took place that caused PTSD, and this resulted in a psychological issue. When I think the adaptation that makes warriors amazing, able to get in the most dangerous situations, able to maintain calm for society, to stand up and serve and protect, that forging really creates an adaptation in the brain and body. And so when you take that same warrior and you place them in a new environment, actually, that's when we start to see a lot of things take place. And some of it is maybe more like a PTSD that happens from an event. Some of it is also withdrawal symptom from being in a high stress environment. The body and brain actually need it, want it, crave it, become accustomed to it, normalize it. And so that when we got into that intersection, I mean, you could call it mind body, I would venture to say that I think it's more significant. And I think we, as all of humanity, when I started really seeing the science that's just come out, I think we're on the cusp of understanding the intersection between mind and body a lot more so than we ever did before.
Yeah.
So I think in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see some very fascinating things take out. So, I mean, that would be my answer. I mean, well, bounce it to you. See what you
Yeah,
say.
I mean, I would say, I'll say it differently, but I would agree with her. It's when we started looking at everything, the physical component is so obvious. It's just no one's looking at it.
What do you mean by that?
Okay. So again, the title of the book is Forged in Chaos. So I'm going to tell you the very simplified theory overall. What are we saying disease is, the fundamental thing? What I'm saying and what I've felt for some time and what I was trying to prove in the book, and then, her and I had this idea, and then we searched for evidence to try, okay, is this true? What we're saying is essentially that it starts in childhood. So the childhood is chaotic. For whatever reason, you could have an alcoholic parent, you could have a drug addict parent, you could have a narcissistic parent, you could have a parent with mental health issues. Hell, you could have parents that are great, but let's say they're in the military, and as a child, you're moving every year. All those, and there's obviously infinite, a poor family. Basically, a chaotic childhood, a childhood where the child his or her nervous system cannot feel safe because it's chaos. So it's like you are in a chaotic environment as a child. In that environment, and again, now we're talking a physical thing. What happens is if everything is chaos every day, that's not an event. PTSD, and I'll not get off on PTSD, but PTSD is event-based. This is not an event. This is an environment. This is not one day your life is chaos. This is every day as a child, your life is chaos. Once that condition and that environment is present, what happens? Our bodies and our brains are designed to adapt to survive, right? Survival of the fittest, which, by the way, for those that don't know, does not mean strong. The way the context Darwin used it was actually adaptability. So survival of the fittest really means the survival of the most adaptable. And the brain and body adapt. And what it does is it actually rewires itself. And what I'm saying, by the way, it was something I felt years ago, but I didn't have the proof. When I talk about LTSD, I was saying, and I probably said it on the last episode, we're reverse wired. I feel reverse wired. But at the time, there wasn't a study that could prove that. There is now. So we can prove definitively, science can prove that in that chaotic environment, a child's brain rewires itself to be calm in chaos. Why? Because it's got to survive, and it can't survive being crazy every day. So the brain rewires itself to be calm in chaos. It basically wires itself to say, chaos is normal. Chaos is my homeostasis. Chaos is my normal. So once you're wired for chaos as your baseline, that means, just logically, that when the environment is chaotic, you're calm. You've reversed the wiring. Conversely, when the environment is calm, your brain is chaotic. One thing I didn't talk about yesterday, which I'll mention now, why? Why, when things are calm, is your brain chaotic? It's because it's waiting for the anxiety, is because it's waiting, it knows it's going to go crazy. So the anxiety is waiting for the other shoe to drop.
So the anticipation.
It's the anticipation of knowing. It's again, and the physical fact here is you're talking about a nervous system, anatomic nervous. I'm saying it wrong. Autonomic nervous system which is what controls fight, flight, freeze. Some people add a fourth word, fawn, which I don't love the word. They just used it because it has an F to begin with and whatever. But it's basically your fight, flight, freeze response, right? So Now, when everything is calm in the environment, you're now kind of freaking out because it knows from experience, your nervous system knows that the other shoe, your dad's going to come home drunk and he's going to start fucking chaos, right? So how do you calm yourself as a child and then as an adult that way? Simple. You create chaos. Once you create, if the environment's calm and you've got the chaos in your mind, how do you calm yourself? Simple. You create chaos in the environment. And then once the chaos is in the environment, you're chill as a cucumber. How do we, and again, this is what happens as a child. So that reverse wiring happens. Now I'm going very broad here, but the misconception that I had when I came up with the idea of LTSD, which LTSD, lack of traumatic stress disorder, that came from me being told I had PTSD, me going, what's PTSD? They go this. I go, that's not how it feels. I don't have a problem in chaos. I miss traumatic stress. I feel happier and more calm in a traumatic, stressful environment. So I don't feel like I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I feel like I have lack of traumatic stress disorder. I need it. I feel better in it. So my mistake that I made until the book with LTSD was thinking that LTSD started in the military and training. And it wasn't until I did your podcast, I did Sean's, and I was talking to people that I just started realizing, no, LTSD starts in childhood. And that's the basis. It's very difficult to summarize. It's way more complicated, but that's the basis of the book, is that forged in chaos. What we're saying is all the problems you're seeing that are being called PTSD are really based on a child that was, their default mode is chaos. They're comfortable in chaos. And then what they're doing later in life is creating chaos in order to be calm because they're reverse wired on a fundamental physical nervous system level, not on a mental perceptual level.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. And of course, my kind of first off the cuff question is, so then if we understand that that is the mechanism, how do you rewire the brain for it to be the opposite of that? But before we get into that,
Great question.
I am curious with all the, in the last few years, there's been a lot of studies on the anticipatory kind of scheduling of how dopamine works. And it's something that we utilize to our advantage enormously so in dog training, because the clicker is the handshake. It's the equal sign between whatever the behavior is and the reward. So, but all these studies, what they've shown is showing that it's the anticipation of the reward that's actually more valuable and powerful than the reward itself. And so I'm curious and I don't know if there's been any like brain mapping or any scans that have shown brain activity when you parallel those two, but I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on if there is a similarity or a parallel between that anticipation that exists in when things are calm and the rewired brain from the childhood is anticipating or even desiring chaos to feel calm. Is it the same as the anticipation that you would experience from before a dopamine rush of a reward?
Excellent question.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a really
the short answer is yes. I'm going to add two things. So one, and this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it because it's true. But we learned you got to be very careful with studies. The assumption that you, I, and most people have is that studies are scientific studies. They're not. There are many studies out there that who's paying for the study?
Right.
Who's paying for the scientist?
What's the agenda?
What's the agenda?
What do they sell?
You can prove just about anything these days.
Exactly. To assume that studies are objective, again, we learned the hard way. It's just not true. It's a very dirty system. And so there are many studies that you look at, and you really have to look at all of them with a critical eye, because it's very easy to prove one aspect and then just kind of go off that. So that being said, I'm not downplaying the I mean, we're using studies in our work. You just have to,
Yeah, I mean, I'm basing it off of the work that I've done.
No, I get it. I'm just saying in general in studies. But the short version is that, which I didn't explain, when you are in a chaotic environment, what's actually happening, again, there's studies that prove this, what's actually happening is your brain is going, I need to survive. So what it's doing in childhood is it's taking the development of developing dopamine receptors. And this is crazy, by the way. It's taking the development of, okay, I'm going to develop my brain as a child, 5 years old, making up numbers, still needs to develop dopamine receptors. Okay. It goes, not important. I don't have enough dopamine because my environment's crazy. I don't need to develop those receptors. I need to develop the receptors that keep me hyper aware, because if I don't, I'll die. And so what's happening is those children, in childhood, their brain stops producing dopamine receptors and starts producing, and again, these are not technical terms, but hypervigilance receptors, survival receptors, in order to basically, again, survive that chaotic environment. So then what happens, and it works, by the way, it works. You survive that environment. The problem is, once you survive that environment, children that grow up in chaos don't have as much dopamine receptors as a child that doesn't grow up in a chaotic environment. So addiction, and I'm using addiction here, it could be literally anything: alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, food. The addiction, the reason people with that background are so prone to addiction is because addiction is a quick dopamine fix. You don't have enough internal dopamine to control your emotions. So addiction is really about using something external to control something internal. Right? So it's using an external substance or something to give yourself the dopamine that you should have normally. So going back to your question, what was the specific part of it? It was...
I guess the parallel between the anticipation of a reward, because in this case, to me, it sounds like, especially when a brain is developing, if it's in a chaotic environment, is that if that kind of role is flip-flopped, where now a child's brain, as it's developing, is craving chaos to feel balanced.
Yeah.
But that anticipation of once it is rewired and now you're in a setting where it's not chaotic, and so now your brain starts to become chaotic to fill that gap of what it's used to, or at this point, really what it's desiring. Mm-hmm. Because that's the only way that it actually feels safe is in those moments. So now your brain is actually desiring chaos the same way, but the same way your brain would, even though you could almost call it cognitive dissonance for drug addicts. They know it's bad for you. They know it's ruining your brain. They know it's killing your finances. It's destroying your family, and they do it anyway because their brain is so hardwired for the anticipation of how it's going to make them feel. They don't give a shit. And so to me, it sounds like it's a parallel.
It's exactly that. And again, that's why I refer in the book quite often, I think we say it a lot, we're chaos addicts. Yeah. We're addicted to chaos. Now, here's something that I learned I'm not, I talk heavily about my addictions in the book. I was never a gambling addict, but I did talk with some gamblers, and I learned something very interesting that has a great parallel here. People that look at people addicted to gambling think that gambling addicts are addicted to winning. They're not.
Yeah, it's the lottery mindset.
They're addicted to losing.
Well, I mean, I guess before I jump in, I guess if you could expound on that.
Well, the reason they're addicted to lose. So first of all, when you're talking about a gambling addict, my brother's a gambling addict, and he would be up thousands of dollars many times in freakish ways. I'm like, dude, you're not even good at cards, and he would crush it. And then every single time he would lose his money and then lose a ton more. And it never made sense to me. And I was talking, like I said, to somebody running meetings, and I explained it to him. You go, because the gambling addict is not looking to win. They are addicted to losing. And the reason is the adrenaline is higher losing $10,000 than it is winning $10,000. In their mind, though, they go, well, I'm up $10,000. What if I was up $20,000? That's how they're consciously justifying it. But subconsciously, they're really they keep going, chasing the dragon, ultimately to get the adrenaline fix of losing. So one of the things that we're actually addicted to, chaos addicts, we're addicted to ultimately the adrenaline, the high. And I would even go as far as say we're addicted to feeling.
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting. If you think about it, why do I like movies so much? Because it's the one time, the one place, the one thing that I allow myself to feel in. So it's like I'm generally emotionless. And then if I watch a movie and it makes me cry, that's like, I don't feel that emotion generally any other time. And the adrenaline, when you've stopped, which is a whole nother subject of the book, but when you cut off emotion as a child because it hurt and you just said, I'm not going to do that anymore. The only emotion that you're now feeling is adrenaline. You're not feeling sadness, happiness, whatever. You can only feel adrenaline or the lack of adrenaline. So the only emotion you're really chasing, I don't know if emotion's the right word, but you're really just chasing excitement. And you need excitement to feel. If you're not excited, you're numb. And it's better to feel something than nothing. And that's where the addiction to chaos
And if you're
comes
someone that has chaos addiction, plus you're calm in chaos, an environment like the military is ideal. It's really a perfect place because you have both. You know, you're well equipped for the situation, plus there's some personal benefit. But as we looked into it too, the brain's also designed for escalation. And so when you have some, you need more and you need more. Yeah. So
Standard
if you have gone into a scenario like combat or something that is quite extreme, then it's going to be very difficult, let's say in normal civilian life, to ever get back up to that kind of level. So the withdrawal symptom is really, important. And I think, society, we actually need this adaptation. We benefit from it, but it's something we say in the book is like, what makes you a superhero in the lives of society can make you a supervillain in your own if you're not careful. Like we utilize this, and I was very aware of that, because I'm writing this as a civilian, to see that these are a lot of these individuals, the fraction of our society that is, well equipped, well adapted to go out in dangerous scenarios. A lot of them have been through very difficult things, but they're the ones that rose up, pushed back, said, I want to use, I want to protect, I want to do something. I am calm in chaos. So they're leveraging something that was actually forged in a difficult scenario. But I don't think we have done, a good of a job as we could. And some of it is just because I don't think we've known that, when they do switch environments, it's like being on an alien planet. And so we need it. We need it very much, but we haven't talked about what it's really like to change that environment.
Yeah. It makes me think of, and I'm curious, again, kind of from if it would be a brain scan, I'm not even sure how you would test it, but I know, especially when kids or your brain is developing and you experiment with drugs, is that it has a much more powerful and profound impact as it relates to becoming addicted. But if you do that and you become addicted while your brain is developing, that becomes a hard wiring that's far more dangerous and hard to change than experimenting with drugs and becoming addicted as an adult. It sounds like this is the same thing.
Yeah. It's kind of like wet cement. If you put your handprint while the cement's wet, it's going to harden that way.
Yeah.
And can you chip it away and change it? Yes. But I think on the development side, yes, it is something that can really, we talk a lot about identity because it does become part of your identity. And we kind of get into this. It's almost two things happening at once. There's a nature and nurture. So there's the natural born warrior with characteristics to want to serve and protect, to want to belong to something bigger. And I think there isn't a nature part of that. I don't think it's all just adaptation from adversity or trauma. There's something really innate in you. And I like how Tyler says it. Say if you're pushed, you're the type that pushes. How do you say that exactly? Because I like it.
Yeah, the way I define a warrior, I don't define a warrior. We went out of the way in the book to say, this book is not just for veterans. It's not just for first responders. My whole point that I was trying to get across is I wanted to define what a warrior is. And to me, a warrior is someone who, when pushed, pushes back. Simple as that.
A lot of kids are warriors.
Absolutely. When pushed,
now we understand it.
It's funny you just said those two words, because how to define a warrior in 2 words? Fuck you. Yeah. That's how I define it. And, I chose Lauren to write this book because it was within a minute of talking to her, I realized, she's a warrior. That was very obvious to me within, a minute of talking. And I'm like, perfect. But she's a civilian. And I really wanted to make sure people understood that I don't see the warrior mentality as something defined by what you did. I see it defined by who you are.
Yeah.
And there are many people who are warriors that are working IT jobs at a desk right now and have never carried a gun for a living. And there's many people, quite frankly, I'm sure that, somehow fell into the military or whatever that, may not really have that warrior spirit. It's like the job doesn't define who you are.
Yeah.
And that was my job as a storyteller, to try and show Tyler the natural born warrior part of it. And we talk about his childhood. And the whole first part is just very colorful storytelling. You're in his mind, for better or for worse. And we're really showing how he's seeing things, because we want to, I think a lot of the purpose is to understand who you are and maybe who the trauma made you to be, but with the whole purpose of actually getting back to the natural born warrior inside of you, that archetype. And I believe our society doesn't nurture young natural warriors as well. Do you know, in all the stories I've told, all the amazing warriors I've worked with, I don't know if I've met a single one that said that they were good in school, liked school, or that the public school system did. They had a terrible experience in the system. What that tells me is that where in certain parts of history, the warrior archetype was celebrated. They noticed some things coming out of that young kid, and they said, we're going to put you with the older warriors. We're going to nurture this.
It was seen as necessary. That time,
okay, that's better.
And therefore, it was celebrated.
Okay, he's right. Yes, because it's necessary. But I think perhaps in modern society, we've gotten to the place we don't believe it's necessary. So therefore, we don't see this as something that we need. And so it's often suppressed. It's even shamed. And there's that person. This is a misfit from the type of, that we need you to be. And so in the face of that, as we begin to really surge, I think a lot of modern warriors, the ones that are able to enter the most dangerous and chaotic scenarios in the world, were actually forged in chaos. They, and I'm sure there's some that maybe were nurtured by older warriors, and that's a wonderful thing if so. But I think that's not true for a lot of people. They jump in.
Well, I think to expand on that, I think, 200 years ago, average society was hell. It's 500 years ago. Have your kids died of dysentery, and, living regular life was savage. Every single day was spent trying to survive. And life was like that for thousands of years, up until very recently have we even had time to need to be entertained. Most people spent like a great white shark. Every single day was just surviving and food and the next meal. So life was hard and war was about the same level of hard. Yeah, I'm running at you, swinging a battle axe, and you're swinging a sword at me, but regular life was pretty savage as well. The difference, so at that time, it's like it's on an equal playing field. Nowadays, regular life is very easy. Even if you look at someone who in the U.S. has on the bottom end of the poverty scale, if you compare them to 200 years ago, if you can sit out on a freaking curb and ask for handouts and survive, that's a pretty easy life compared to 200 years ago. And so, but now life is this easy and war is still the same level of savage as it was 500 years ago. So the gap between the two of them is huge. And the other thing I want to add on to that, which is separate, but she started bringing it up, and it's I think one of the most important parts of the book, is we came up with the concept of the warrior and the destroyer. When people talk about, when people talk about the numbers today of veterans, taking their lives, and more than that, just in general, what's the term you hear? You hear a lot about the war within. Okay, it's a term, the war within. The battle against yourself, blah, 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 blah. But no one's, in my experience, tried to define it. Like, what is it? Yes, I know it's a battle within. And by the way, I fought it with myself for years and years and years. But I'm like, what is it? What's the why? Where did it come from? I know the symptoms of the war within. What's the core disease? What caused it? So we spent a lot of time trying to figure that out and trying to define it. The reason is I felt and we felt once we could define it and explain it, maybe people could understand. Once you know you can't find an enemy that you don't know. Once we can explain it, this is who the enemy is. This is where the enemy came from. This is what the battle's about. Then you can start to go, okay, I can start to work on those things. But I think most people who take their own lives are doing so because they don't know where to begin, which again, and I understand how I've been there. I've been in a place where I'm like, I didn't know where to even begin. So the war within, this is our take on the war within. When you are born, and again, we are at the point, I believe this, and she believes it, and I think it's accurate, which is, I think there's just a nature part of being a warrior. There's just something that's innate in you. And again, if I push you, you're going to push back. Like, fuck you. That's just something.
I wouldn't say that to you.
No, but that's just something that's innate. And I think back to myself as a child. I had that as a kid. Fuck you. But when you want to fuck, I'll show you. I always had that. I don't know where it came from. I don't remember choosing it. So I think that, most warriors have this innate nature, warrior branding, for lack of a better term. So that's who you really are from birth. There's a lot of great traits associated with that. You want to help others, you want to stand up and protect, all these different great traits. So that's the innate you, which is a good person. Then trauma happens, chaos happens in childhood. You are not getting, and part of this is you're not getting your needs met. Now, as a child, when you're a child and you're in a chaotic environment, a child, no matter how young, knows instinctively, this is not good. Like, this is a bad environment for me. I don't care how old the kid is. There's an innate level of knowledge that the child knows. So children are egocentric and think that the world is the way it is because of their actions. So a child basically looks at their chaotic environment and goes, I must be bad. I must be bad. I must not be worthy. I must not be worth it. All these negative things. So then you've got this innate good protector, this warrior. Then you've got chaos and trauma happens. Now you have the creation of behaviors in order to survive. The child's not getting their needs met because they're in a chaotic situation. So how do you get your needs met? Well, you learn to manipulate as a survival mechanism. I did. So I learned to manipulate. Now you have the creation, that manipulation, that mask, the manipulator mask is a survival technique that creates what we're calling the destroyer. And the destroyer is manipulating for survival. And again, as a child, all this is really based on survival. So you got the innate you, the warrior, the good person. Then you got the destroyer, the manipulator, the bad person. That's where it was created. The problem becomes when, you start getting older, you become a teenager, you become an adult. For me, I didn't know which one was me. I thought both were me. So my whole life up until a few years ago, I don't know if I'm fundamentally good or fundamentally bad. Truly didn't know. I'm a very logic person, ridiculously logical. So where's the evidence go? I would go, all these traits and all these actions, good. Oh, good. Then the manipulation, especially when it came to women. I was a shitty fucking boyfriend for years, shitty husband for years. And I would look at all the manipulation I did and all the shit that I did and go, bad. So at the same time, half of me thought I was good and half of me thought I was a bad person. And the war within, we believe, is that struggle between the innate good you and the you that trauma forced you to become.
Yeah. It makes me think of the other side of that coin. And I'm curious if you guys dug into it at all for the non-warrior, right? Is that if I think most people, whether they agree with it or not, can understand the nature part of it, is that there's a genetic component that sets you up for being more warrior-like than not. For the people that aren't,
Yeah.
Could you argue then that if they're in that chaotic environment and they don't have the pushback, they don't have the warrior type of mentality, that they're less negatively affected and impacted by those chaotic environments, would they then develop LTSD to a much lower degree or not at all if they're not that way?
I mean, I would say that studying the stress responses, there's almost kind of two ways. You have some adaptation that says, okay, basically the child goes, the world's a fucked up place. It's never going to change. Therefore, I will adapt myself to thrive within it. And then there's some others who almost develop a hypersensitivity. So they're trying to make the world easy, soft, kind, and sensitive because everything becomes overwhelming to them. So they look for so the warrior says, I'm going to change the environment. I'll protect you. I'll make sure this never happens to somebody else. There's another adaptation that begins to hide or tries to get the environment to create a sensitive, safe place because everything's overwhelming to them. And so I almost see in society, I think we have almost a polarization that's happening where some say, hey, look, adversity can make you who you are. You can do this kind of thing. And others who say we actually need to do our best to change the environment because I can't handle you saying this or you doing this. It's very overwhelming to me. And so you actually can develop hypersensitivity to it. So, I mean, that's what I would say. You jump in.
I think because we did the short answer to your questions. We studied this a lot. We spent months talking about this. I think I'm going to make it, we could fracture into a million different things that we talked about, but I'll break it into a very simple thing. You have two, and again, just in broad strokes, you have two ways to go about this. Adversity happens, chaos, trauma, whatever you want to call it, right? That happens. The warrior goes, fuck you, and pushes back. The non-warrior is forever a victim.
Yeah.
So it's
that's the word, yeah.
So it's like salmon and maybe trout. I don't know. I'm not a fisherman, so I don't know if trout go with the flow as well. I don't know.
There's some fishermen in the comments that's like, that's a horrible analogy. It should be.
And again, the warrior doesn't mean that you resort to some kind of physical pushback. It is more, we're talking really, it's an AIDS thing, and it could be in any area of life. I mean, like he said, it wasn't until much later that I began to share some of my story with him. And he was like, look, maybe we're totally different. But the adaptation that I created in my childhood, which had some chaos and trauma, was very similar. So it really could take place in, I think, many people, many ways. And so I think in society, we're also seeing this difference too.
Yeah. And what it ultimately comes down to, if you look at any addiction, again, I'll take a Pepsi challenge to this. Throw me any addiction. And the core of every addiction, what somebody is trying to do is control. And where does control come from? The need to control. Simple. Control comes from not having control as a child. And therefore, all a child wants is to gain some control over the chaos, the trauma, the adversity. So it's like, I'll give you an example. You look at sexual trauma. Okay, I didn't experience sexual trauma as a child that I know of. And so, but when you see sexual trauma in childhood, it goes generally one of two broad categories. One, somebody experiences sexual trauma and goes, I am going to forever go out of my way to protect children from the Alaskan Avenger. That guy, sexual abuse as a child, he freaking hunts sexual predators down and I think beats them with a hammer, if I'm not mistaken. He's like, I'm like, his version was, and his control that he was I was a victim. I didn't have control as a child, but now I'm going to be the Avenger and I'm going to go, I have control over what I'm going to do to them. And I'm going to take away their ability to affect a controlless child. That's one side. The other side is, which shockingly happens, but again, it's so crazy to me, but it's worth mentioning because we have to understand the basis. There's no rational basis, there's no logical basis, but there is a subconscious adaptation here where there's also a group that gets sexually abused as a child and then becomes an abuser later in life.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, I think
Why?
the percentage of sexual abusers is like 97%.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's
that,
pretty
that were
much.
abused.
But and you go, that doesn't make.
But they're recreating the same situation in which I'm the one with the power. Again,
Yes.
the brain does this, you know.
Yeah. So it's like, it's incomprehensible to me, but it happens. So to me, I feel like the Alaskan Avenger version is, and again, that's the kind of warrior side of saying, I'm going to do something about it. And then the other side goes, I am forever a victim to this, and I just want to be in the controlling position, and now I victimize others. So I still see them as the same overall wiring, for lack of a better term.
So I guess from a paralleled standpoint, would you say that addiction across the board, whether it's drugs, whatever, and LTSD, is the same thing? Like, would you consider LTSD an addiction to chaos?
100%. Yes.
Just to me, like
That's exactly how I feel it is.
not from a marketing standpoint, but in terms of who this book and the entire collective story applies to, is almost fucking everybody. Because
We worked for it to be a book that would be more than just
not just to trauma and chaos, but if these same principles and protocols or mental schedules, I guess, with the synapses that happens in the brain is all the same thing, basically. I guess the next question for me or from me would be, do you attack LTSD the same way you would addiction to anything else? If that addiction is a hardwiring in the brain, something that a child gets addicted to and then struggles with later in life, are you going to attack it the same way?
Okay, so to answer that question, so first of all, I'll say this about my concept of LTSD. I see LTSD as the core of why. LTSD is an addiction, but it's really, you're using every other addiction just fits into that. Your drugs, alcohol, sex, those are just the tools. Those are not really those are just the tools to create chaos.
It's what's available.
Those are the tools to create chaos. And we get into the book on why different
we
people...
story tell how it showed up in your life too.
Why are people drawn to different tools? And we go a little bit into that. And there's a whole science onto that, which is interesting and makes a lot of sense. But the core why is you are creating chaos to essentially create homeostasis. The body is always looking for homeostasis. So is the brain. Now, you talked about treating it in a traditional addiction sense. I'm going to go on a limb here. Again, it's not going to be popular. The way addiction is treated is, I'm going to use the word, and people can attack me all they want. Pathetic. It's pathetic. And the addiction community needs to do better. AA, which, by the way, I don't think there's debatably another organization that has done more good and tried to help people than anyone. They're up there. If they're not the top, they're the top 3. So I love AA, but AA it was developed in the late 20s, early 30s. It is very, very light because of that. It's over 100 years, or almost. It's approaching 100 years old. It is severely lacking a scientific update, for lack of a better term. I did the whole AA thing. I went to rehab. I think there's, in the addiction treatment community, it needs a massive scientific update. That's my opinion. And where I'm going with this is, if you're treating addiction without talking about the autonomic nervous system, I'm sorry, but it's not even worth listening to. If you really understand that and the nervous system, and you understand how it all works, if you're treating, I'll say it better, if you're treating addiction mentally, it's a physical problem. It's not a mental problem. It's partially a mental problem, but it's way more a physical problem. And here's the proof I have of that. When I had serious trouble with addictions, and I mean bad. How I'm alive today, I have no idea. I should have died. I've done more drugs. I hit like Robert Downey Jr. level, and I'm not proud of that. A little. No, but I'm saying I was absolutely self-destructive, no question about it.
With Charlie Sheen 2.0. Is that
Yeah, well, Charlie Sheen probably
Minus the
much
AIDS.
farther from what I know, but yeah. But so what it comes down to is, I mean, I was out of control, just actually out of control, and I tried so many things. I tried this, I tried that, I tried therapy, blah, 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 blah. When I finally treated and I learned and I read a million books, when I saw the nervous system, I go, whoa, this makes sense. Because so many times people were telling me and I go, yeah, you're telling me this, but that's not what it feels like. I could feel, and if somebody's out there listening to this, I think for what we suffer from chaos addiction. And when everyone's telling you it's in your head, I would argue that I knew, and you know, it's not in your head, it's in your body. You can feel that there's something else there that's present, and it's not taken care of by talking alone. It's not taken care of by, taking antidepressants. There's something physically wrong. And I think we all know the truth of this, and it's just not been listened to. When I realized that, and it went with this innate feeling I had, and I started actually treating my nervous system. And it's going to sound crazy, but she knows it's true. I changed my most severe addiction in a week.
So how did you treat your nervous system in that regard?
It's going to sound ridiculous, and I know because I thought it was ridiculous when I read it. But what's crazy is once you understand what your nervous system is doing and the pitfalls and the traps, once you understand how the whole thing works, you suddenly throw in agency of choice into the cycle. So there's a cycle. And for years, I felt like I was on this cycle and it's a roller coaster and I have no break. I'm just on the ride. And it's like addiction, rehab, get out of rehab, feel guilty, feel shame, start to do better, start to go back to old habits. And I'm just back on the roller coaster. Once I understood what was actually happening with my body on the ride, it suddenly gave me a little break because I understood, hey, when I'm in this part of the ride, my nervous system is doing this. And this is a pitfall. I'll just give you an example. If you start to feel resentment, your nervous system is going to subvert your conscious control, and it's just going to take you straight to the substance. And again, I'm just simplifying this. But once I saw all the pitfalls and what the nervous system was actually doing, it inserted a brake, a handbrake, and an agency of choice that I could then take a step back, a little pause, and go, I know where this cycle goes. Do I want to continue going in the same direction at the same speed? And it just gave me the ability to choose.
So it was purely the mental understanding of what was physically taking place.
And that, yes. And that is why this book, what we're trying to do, like, can we completely heal you from reading a book? No, it's much more complicated than that. But if you understand what's happening, whether it's the nervous system issue, whether it's the warrior and destroyer, we're depending on the physical health or the mental health community to explain to us what the system and the cycle and what it all is. But I'm telling you, and again, if you want to say I'm wrong, fine, prove me wrong. They don't know. They don't know. And if they knew, they would have told us. They continue to go down what they've been doing, not a new path. PTSD, again, I won't go into it, but I can prove PTSD is the incorrect diagnosis for the vast majority of veterans. I can prove that it's wrong within its own diagnosable features. There's things within the diagnosis that prove it's incorrect, and they just subvert it. I'll give you a great example on that. They started to figure out that PTSD was not the best catch-all. They started to figure this out. You know how they solved it? You ever heard of complex PTSD? Okay, complex PTSD is the new thing. So they basically were like, yeah, this doesn't really fit. It's really not a catch-all. How can we, again, PTSD, by the way, has to be diagnosed per event. One event. PTSD has to be diagnosed on one event.
Like by the technical definition?
Yeah.
Yes.
In 30 days.
It can't be diagnosed until post 30 days from a single event. So they went, oh, yeah, that's like, how do you characterize, do you think every veteran's PTSD is from one event? Hell no. That's ridiculous.
Well, and a lot of the statistics between combat and non-combat for mental health challenges, suicide was not any different. And so that also led us to see that the event, if it was just event-based, but again, the environment is not talked about. The adaptation is not talked about. So it's almost assuming that you have someone who, was perfectly healthy, had no difference than a regular civilian. They had one, event take place that was traumatic, and now they're this changed person, while not taking in account so many different aspects of what we're dealing with. And so our solutions also aren't supporting the full, all the ways it affects the body and the adrenals and the hormones and the nervous system and all the ways that it actually does affect, your sense of identity and purpose and, all those kind of things. So it's our goal is to broaden the conversation with really the hope of we have to provide a better care, better understanding. And that's what we do get into, because the first part of the book is really just his story. We're showing, kind of call him patient zero. We offer up him in many scenarios into his dating and relationships and sex, into, experiences in combat, into, all childhood, all of it. Then we lay out a lot of what we're talking about here, but then we get to creating a war plan for life, which is if there is a war within, how to actually get in there and begin to look at all parts and begin to work on some of it simultaneously from nervous system to mind to that understanding the warrior and the destroyer, the loss of purpose that oftentimes accompanies loss of identity. And so then how to actually look at all that and start to get a handle, because he's amazing, proof of the mental understanding coupled with actionable items where it really, okay, that resonated with me. It was incredible. I mean, in a relatively short amount of time.
Relatively short amount of time, and everything took a 180. The other part, so to finish what I was saying about PTSD, so they basically figured out that PTSD was not really it was very simple. So how did they complicate it? Simple. They added a C, and now it's called complex PTSD, which is probably the laziest diagnosis I could think of in my entire life. Well, it doesn't really fit. Let's just call it complex, and we'll call that good. So
it's complicated.
It's complicated. Exactly. No, literally. But you'll go to the doctor and go, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. They'll go, oh, God. Well, you have complex PTSD. What does that mean? It's complex.
Yeah.
That's literally it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. If I was a mental health professional, I would be embarrassed. And I don't mind telling them that. So when you tell somebody they have complex PTSD is, and let's just be honest, what it's for. Here's drugs, Mike. Take these the rest of your life. It's unfixable. We can all talk and act like that's not what it is, but that's the truth.
Being on a lifestyle of drug.
Yeah. They're convincing you just like AA does. You are forever an addict, Mike. Forever. If you stop going to meetings, you're done. I don't believe that. I don't believe it, and I know I don't believe it because I'm proof that I don't go to meetings, okay? And nothing to take away from AA. But if the problem with AA is that if I tell you that you are addicted forever, the problem with you is alcohol. And if you just stay away from alcohol, everything will be okay. And you got to keep going to meetings and talk to your sponsor to stay away from alcohol and everything will be fine. Now, don't get me wrong. That's true. That's technically true, and it does work, and it's worked for a ton of people, and they're right, and they've helped millions, literally. Problem is, that's not curing the disease. That's fixing the symptoms. Alcohol wasn't actually the problem. Alcohol was a shitty coping mechanism. The problem was, why did you drink? And there's reasons for that. If you never fix the why, they are correct. You will forever be an alcoholic. And again, this goes back to the 30s. He wasn't thinking about that at the time, and he developed an amazing curriculum that worked for almost 100 years. But we're at the point now, and it still can work. What we're trying to offer is, okay, great. And I'm not saying you should drink. I don't drink. I don't drink at all anymore. What I'm saying is I fixed the why. I don't feel the need to drink because I cured my why.
Yeah. Taking one step back, so you mentioned that it's a physical dependency, it's a physical response, and when you started to understand that, that's when things started to change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not to go full chicken and the egg, but like technically, wouldn't that still be in your head by the technical definition of if you understand that it's the understanding the working mechanism of it that allows you to do it, like it's still a mental understanding.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't. I probably cut myself. I didn't take it to the next level. So first step, and I interrupt myself all the time. First step is understanding the roller coaster, the cycle. And by understanding it, suddenly I had choices where before I didn't have any choices. Step 2 is you have to work on the nervous system.
I guess that's the big question is how do you do that?
Well, that's a much more complicated question. I'm going to give you a very simple answer. Actually, so that's book 2. Oh, okay. We're developing it. So the answer is it depends. It depends. Different modalities work for different people. What works for me may not work for someone else because all of our bodies are obviously infinitely complex and everyone's nervous system is different. And, some things that work for people, it's like, psychedelics. Psychedelics work for some people. Some people are like, I didn't really experience a change from it. But if you look at psychedelics, just as an example, everyone talks about psychedelics. Oh, people have amazing. Did you do ayahuasca? Okay. Oh, but a lot of people that have had amazing results.
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, having not done it, and basically being, told secondhand in each case, my understanding of it, which, admittedly is a little limited, but it's that it was kind of the unlocking of the mind to be able to sort through everything going back to, the earliest childhood memories and being able to kind of sit down in a singular session and dissect and go through all of it.
100% accurate. What's crazy to me is that no one is saying why. Why are you able to do that? We know the why. It's because that substance is physically putting your nervous system in a programming mode state. That's why. It's a nervous system change. It's putting your nervous system into you're safe, now I can take new input. That's what it is. But no one talks about it like that. I've never heard anyone ever describe it that way. But that's what's actually happening. It's a nervous system reprogramming mode. And again, this is not scientific terms by any stretch of the imagination. But again, the reason psychedelics are working for people is because it's doing something physical, not just talk. Right. You can talk on psychedelics, but it's while your body is in a mode that's willing to listen to itself.
Yeah. Before we get into kind of the soup to nuts process that you guys outline in the book, if you're willing to kind of summarize that or Cliff's note, it's, I know we obviously can't dissect
process.
Well, I'll help uncover that. But before we get into that, I am curious. Did you guys uncover any findings when you look at that childhood scenario of creating this addiction and dependence on chaos for the children that didn't experience that? I mean, obviously, or I'm assuming that there are some that didn't experience that that now go into a combat scenario, still experience that. Was there any research or statistics on the disparity between those who went through that as a child and then ended up in combat with LTSD versus those who didn't experience that in childhood and both still ended up with LTSD or didn't?
So the short answer to that question is it's like anything. There are exceptions to everything.
Sure. I guess generally.
There's always a person that just doesn't fit anything. I'll say this. I have a friend who's been in the military for 27 years. He's been in my old unit for 22, I think, 21, 22. He's done everything there is to do. He's super soldier. And he didn't fit the template for a long time. I didn't really understand how he fit into this. And then we were having a conversation about his childhood and some certain things. He didn't grow up in a chaotic environment like I did, or like he didn't fit the stereotype. He did have certain issues, but I hadn't figured out how to commingle the theory with his experience and my knowledge of him. And then I figured it out. And the short way to say it is that he doesn't experience a lot of the things of LTSD. The parts that he has are less severe. So there's like, it's just a less severe version, basically. Yeah. He's not craving the chaos to the degree probably you or I would.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's still present.
Yeah. I mean, well, I guess I'm curious in that obviously it's anecdotal as far as my experience because it's just mine. But I had that similar childhood. Like it was not chaotic. It was very healthy. It was very loving. It was stable. It was safe. There was very little chaos or conflict. And similarly, like talking to so many guys over the last 7 years of having this show, who did have chaotic childhoods, who experienced the exact same path that you're talking about, just like the comments that you've received. I'm more of the anomaly that way. And similarly, I haven't really experienced a lot of the, PTSD, LTSD type of stuff.
And so would be the perfect.
Yeah. So my natural assumption is that it's way more common that way. I guess I'm just curious if you guys kind of uncovered that same thing, is that if you don't have that super chaotic environment and the rewiring of the brain, are you far more resilient down the road to chaotic environment?
I would say, but our theory is in some ways, actually, if your baseline is quite normal, so you didn't normalize chaos, in some scenarios, it can actually cause a more typical PTSD response because the situation really is way outside your normal baseline. Yeah. And so that's when you see a more, what we would see as a traditional PTSD diagnosis, I think, is for people who, what they faced in combat was so different and extreme. And the LTSD version, where you actually begin to crave it, need to experience it, create it, oftentimes, and this is not, scientific paper, but oftentimes were the people who had the chaotic childhood and, they experience it, and so therefore have a lot more of a chaos addiction to it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that, because like now for me, where I'm at in my mid 40s, and I didn't do 30 deployments, but I've done several. I've been to war. I've been in gunfights. Yeah. I know people who have done less that have far worse symptoms.
Well, let me. And when you say symptoms, I'm going to tell you the core symptom. And what I'm about to say is the core problem in the veteran community. I could take what I'm about to say. You could take everything negative in the veteran community, and I can pretty much plug this in as the cause. Most, and again, there's exceptions, you're one. That being said, I bet we could talk about your childhood and we would find moments that probably, for sure, were, like being bullied heavily. That may not happen at home, but that could have been the thing. A lot of times guys think their childhood was great. And then when you start talking to him, you go, that's actually really chaotic.
There's for sure a few instances. But generally speaking, it was
as far as the environment.
Yeah. So, but the key point, the key core issue that sets up every other issue is lack of self-worth. The child, and again, where does it comes from? Comes from chaotic childhood environment. The child feels it's responsible, and the takeaway is, I don't have any innate worth. If I had an innate worth, I wouldn't be in this environment. That was my takeaway. And the vast majority, I'd say 95-ish% of everyone I talk to, and I chat with a lot of people, tried to, help them. I'd say that's 95% of the issue. So later, I'll give you an example. I talked to this guy at a rehab place. I won't say which one. And he had a silver star from a pretty severe incident. And basically this guy died. And he's got massive, what we would say, PTSD. I mean, he's having serious issues. I mean, really bad. And so I'm talking to him and I'm like, all right, man, what's your What's your issue? And again, they're going PTSD. What's your event? And obviously his biggest event was that gunfight or that battle, whatever. And he's telling me the story. And I go, okay. And then what happened? He's like, that's it. And I'm like, I hate to ring it to you, buddy, but you're a hero. Like everything you did there, like, I'm like, you did a great job. You saved people and all this. It was this whole conversation. I'm like, yeah, you fucking deserve a Silver Star. It was amazing. And it took me 42 days of talking to him to really understand what the issue was. The issue was that somebody else died. And because that guy, which I figured out over time, and this is when I was putting all this shit together. This book is largely a side effect of me writing 2 notebooks full of shit during rehab and just going, okay, like, this is patterns, and I want to figure out these patterns because I'm seeing them. And that was a heavy part of where the book came from. And he had such a bad childhood that he had no self-worth. So that guy that died during the gunfight, he had debilitating guilt because that guy had kids, he was single, and he was like, I shouldn't have lived. But it wasn't I shouldn't have lived. It was like, I shouldn't have lived because I have no worth. That guy had worth. And he wasn't actually suffering from PTSD. But he was suffering from a lack of self-worth.
And sometimes I think we talked a lot about in an environment that prizes sacrifice, which is a really positive thing. But if you start to see your value in only the ability to sacrifice or to hurt and feel pain silently, and that is the only way you know how, and then again, if you add in this loss of sense of purpose, if let's say you transition out of an environment where you felt that you could sacrifice and you felt a sense of value in that, you really, if you have low self-worth, I mean, it's almost debilitating because the one thing that you did find a sense of purpose in, the one thing you did feel that you could add value is by sacrificing yourself for someone else. Even that's gone. And you jump in, you thought of something.
Oh yeah, this is okay, critical to say. And that is, I'll tell you what pisses me off. And again, I don't give a fuck. This is ridiculous. And the military should be embarrassed by what I'm about to say. Oh my gosh. The rate, military rate of well, I don't know if you can say that word on YouTube, but the rate, so many guys are taking their own lives. It's crazy. No, it's not crazy. What's crazy is that the system hasn't recognized that the system reinforces self-destruction. We are designed and trained and indoctrinated to constantly give to the group and sacrifice and self-destruct for the group and never take away from it, never ask for anything, never be a moment's problem to the group, always give, never take. We are bred that way. And then one day they go, oh yeah, now you should be the 180-degree opposite. Oh my God, he didn't talk to anyone for help. Yeah, no fucking shit, dude. That's what you bred into us. So it's not shocking to me that guys are taking their lives. It's shocking to me that the system hasn't recognized the true why and started to change it.
So with that, I guess what would your recommendation from a 30,000 foot view system standpoint of how you, breed a warrior culture where you do focus on team gear, your gear, you, if as a team we're going to be stronger, like how do you kind of reconcile or leverage that where you get a balance where you can still be confident and super effective as a warfighter, but also take care of you? Like how do you balance that?
I mean, it's a complicated question. I think that there's a lot of ways. I'd say 2 things. I'm going to use just 2 examples because it's infinitely complex. One is there needs to be an entire paradigm shift in how the military, as well as the VA and just everyone has to look at this differently. And everyone has to stop looking. And by the way, I'm going to add this about people taking their lives. No one sees it as when someone's taking their life, what do they basically say at its core? And I think this is pretty not debatable. At its core, if you take your own life, you're basically saying, I have no innate worth. I mean, you're saying that by the act of what you're doing. So right there, it's pointing to what I'm saying is the core problem. But 2, you're also saying, and I think this is the other piece, again, you have a warrior and a destroyer. People taking their own lives are doing so because they think they're the destroyer.
Well, I think to your point in the lack of self-worth is that's a huge part of it that I think is the most largely misunderstood, is that most people, I think if you ask them that, why do people take their own life? It's because they've given up. Whereas people, you can see at the Hanoi Hilton for 7 years, like human beings will not give up under absurd circumstances. So it's not a matter of giving up. It's a matter of feeling like they're not worth anything.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes. And then I think there's a part B to it. The part B, and we identified this, and again, it's our theory, we know this definitively, but we think the person thinks they have no innate worth because they're a destroyer. They also think they have no innate worth, and they think they are the destroyer. They think they're fundamentally bad. But they're designed for protection. I think a lot of people that take their lives, specifically veterans, are doing so as a last act of the warrior of self-sacrifice because I have so little value. The world, my family, my friends would just be better off without me. So I think a lot of times that happens, it's they have no self-worth, they feel like a burden, and they go, you know what? Because they are still actually the warrior. They're not the destroyer, but they don't know that. So the last act is to take themselves out of the equation as self-sacrifice, which again is something, it's a mentality that's been programmed during your whole active life. A grenade gets thrown on the ground, you jump on it. I feel like they're jumping on their own grenade because that's how they feel. And it's an act of self-sacrifice in their minds. It's an act of self-sacrifice because they have no innate worth. It's like their last hero action in an inverted way. So I feel two things. One, I feel like everyone needs to change their concept on why these things are happening. Why is the problem? And again, let's look at this. If PTSD was the problem, 20 years ago, you could say, well, PTSD is the problem, but the suicide rate is what it is because no one knows about the problem. So if we raise awareness and get the awareness out there, then the rate will go down. It hasn't. It's increased. Why? Simple. Because the problem is not the problem. So I feel that people need to have a new conversation and go, okay, we've obviously been wrong. That's demonstratable by what's happened. What could it actually be? And we're hoping that this book starts that conversation. The other part of it, I believe, that is actionable is I believe the military needs to do an infinitely better job on transitioning out. The way the military does it is you're on the train, you're getting out. Great. Have a good one. Oh, there's an ACAP process. Yeah, come on. You've been in for 10 years. You spend 3 months, you work on a resume that no one gives a shit about. There needs to be a process that takes all these issues that we know are issues now. We know it. It's not debatable. And we need to incorporate those issues, identity, loss of all these things. And we need to put all these education pieces into the getting out process. Hey, I know you've been sacrificing for the team for 10 years, but guess what? Now you're getting out. Now it's all about you. Now you need to take care of you. And there needs to be a reprogramming.
A new adaptation.
You're indoctrinated when you come in. Like, let's be honest, that's what the military, that's the beginning of the military. There needs to be a re-indoctrination into transitioning into civilian life.
Do you know what the disparity is between the civilian rate of taking your own life versus the veteran population?
I have to check, but both have skyrocketed. We're at the highest for civilians since Great Depression.
I mean, do you know, I guess, ballpark how much higher the veteran?
I would have to check.
Yeah.
I would have to check.
And in the same vein, I doubt that there's any way to even find data.
Yeah.
Let alone,
True data,
well,
you never know.
There's probably no way. I guess my next question is historically speaking, there's probably no way to even find data, let alone validate it. But I am curious if there was any even thought put into, say, 2,000 years ago at the height of the Spartan and warrior and Roman Empire, where there was, strangely or ironically enough, way more emphasis put on the detransitioning out of wartime environments, largely due to logistics, is that they had to spend 3 months hiking back, and they spent time with their guys sitting around fires, not in combat, et cetera. But I would love to know if there's even a way to figure out if the suicide rate among veterans back in those days was at all close to what it is now.
I mean, the statistics I don't think exist, but let me tell you, we did do research on what you're saying, and the contrast is striking. But here's what I think the fundamental difference is. And again, there's many things we could say. But the fundamental difference in my mind is when a Spartan went to war, Spartans held for up until and Lauren said this at the beginning, up until relatively modern times, the warrior had value post-war because the warrior was seen as a value to protect the village. It's been that way for thousands of years. It is only recently that the warrior is seen as unnecessary.
Yeah.
And so you look at World War II. What was the suicide rate after World War II? Why were veterans post-World War II not, what was different about post-World War II versus now?
I mean, to me, and this is just also based off of, or dovetailing on what you said, I think, the guys who fought in World War II were, generally born right around World War I, went through an entire depression and then served in World War II. So their life was so much fucking harder.
They were hard.
Which means war is not going to be such a big contrast. I think they were better equipped to deal with it. I mean, I can't say that for a fact, but I mean, it makes sense.
Yes, the other part of it is that they, everyone went to World War II.
Yeah.
It affected not just everyone or every soldier or whatever. It affected everyone.
Yeah.
The women, if you weren't in the military, you were at home making bombs. Like everyone was a part of the war. So there wasn't a separation between veteran and civilian post-World War II. Right. Everyone had been affected relatively equally. By the way, a huge misconception that people don't realize is, what the average combat time was in World War II?
It's fascinating.
And I forget the exact number. So again, historians don't rip on me, but it's like 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And people go, what? No, Battle of the Bulge. The logistics of World War II were so insane that you're moving an entire tank division miles and miles. So it's like they would fight for 3 days, but then it would take weeks, months for the new, the logistics of the battle to change. So by and large, even if you look at the Battle of Normandy, that was an initial fight. And then after that, it was pretty sporadic. So the average combat time, I believe, is something like 2 weeks in World War II.
Do you know if that same or a similar statistic exists going back to, say, the Civil War? Do you know?
Well, sort of. So it's very different in World War I. And again, it's very hard to find this exact data. So sometimes we have to find data and kind of extrapolate and glean from it what we think. It's not definitively what we're looking for. But like World War I is a very different battle. World War I is very different because you had trench warfare. So they were kind of always in combat. They, you know what I mean? They always kind of were and they kind of weren't. But they were under that constant threat all the time, which, by the way, shell shock, the precursor to PTSD, where did that come from? It came from World War I. Now, again, artillery rain down is a very fundamental difference in everything else. Vietnam is dramatically different for one major reason. And that is Vietnam is when the majority of soldiers, and again, when I say soldiers, I mean all-encompassing term, Navy, or seamen, Marines, airmen, was drafted. So you've got most of the military at that time is not voluntary. So it was Vietnam is like when kind of the veteran story changed. And when I look at Vietnam, the classic image of PTSD started post-Vietnam. I grew up in the 80s. I mean, First Blood is about PTSD.
Yeah.
But when you look at the Vietnam image of PTSD, you have to understand where it came from. It came from people that were drafted. They didn't volunteer. They were drafted. So their perspective is very different. They see themselves, and there's a group that sees themselves very much as victims. And I'm not saying they worked, but I'm saying it's like it's myself. Like I joined, I volunteered to go, I re-enlisted to go to combat. I volunteered for this and this. When I got blown up, I was like, well, yeah, no shit, I got blown up. That's the side effect of the choices I made. A person that got drafted and gets blown up in Da Nang, you know, there's a reason why the victim mentality was more prevalent I believe, in Vietnam than it was prior to, because it was just a very different set of circumstances.
Well, then I think, maybe this is an overgeneralization, but, if you take the sample of everybody who was drafted and compare that to in the last 20 years of people who volunteered, and if you were to somehow be able to kind of cross-reference their childhoods, it goes to that distinction between PTSD and LTSD, in that they're two totally separate things. It's not that LTSD is a replacement for PTSD. It's that they're two very separate things.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a whole probably subject matter that, it gets really complicated when we're going to historical perspective and everything. But the short way I think to say it is that we don't in the book try to answer what it used to be. We give some societal factors of things that we feel are contributing. We are speaking in the book of what I think it is now based on my personal experience, based on how I felt, and based on the experience of, hundreds, if not, maybe a couple thousand just people I know directly or indirectly, or I've talked to or heard their story. This feels very authentic to the reality in which I've been living and experienced. And then we're just kind of off of that truth, that fundamental truth that we feel, then we're trying to go, okay, where do we think this came from? But we don't definitively know. But I do know since 2008, when I came up with the PTSD or LTSD concept, I know that when I explain it to people, they go, yes, that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know this, that, and the other, but they go, yes, that's what it feels like to me. And that, by the way, came from, which I'll mention, in 2008, I was seeing a therapist at the VA, and I was like, yep, here's my problems. And they go, great, you have PTSD. And I go, what's PTSD? They go, this, and this. I looked at it. I went, yeah, I don't think that's it. That doesn't fit what I feel. And they were like, well, no, that's what it is. And then I went and read, like 2 books on PTSD, came back a week later. And again, I was like, I think, like, could it be something else? And they're like, no, that's what it is. And that is when I started on my mission. When they told me again, no, you got this. And I was like, it doesn't fit. I'm sorry, it just doesn't fit how I feel. And I'm going to figure out what fits how I feel.
Yeah.
And once I figured it out, then I talked to people and it fit how they felt. And that kind of overall, years later led to the basis of the book.
Yeah, 17 years in the making, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I wanted to dig. Obviously, we've talked a lot about different concepts in the book, but jumped around a little bit intentionally. I would love to kind of just summarize or outline the book, because there is a lot of story to it that isn't just medical diagnosis and jargon, if you will. And there's funny stories, there's stuff about training, there's, highlighting even relationships and sex and how it kind of all plays into it. But if you could do 2 things, is kind of summarize the book so that people have a good understanding of the gist of it. But then also after that, if we could walk through it, because I'm curious, I would say most specifically, in that if, let's say, a patient comes to, whether it's the new organization that you guys are looking to stand up, or anybody who's well-versed in the concepts that we're talking about, the biggest question I have is how they go through that process to then determine, is it LTSD or is it PTSD? And is it just solely based on an ability to either map the brain and see if it's a childhood rewiring, or is there a systematic process that you guys go through to determine which side that falls on?
I'll start this because I want to say something and then jump in whenever you want. But I want to start this because I feel like it's important to say, if I'm being completely open and honest here, which I should mention because it's pretty important, is I worked on this book for 15 years but if I really took a light to myself, the reality is, and I needed to get an ending and I needed to figure some things out. But really, I could have pushed harder. The reason I didn't is I didn't feel worthy of having a book.
Really?
I mean,
imposter syndrome kind of thing? Or?
So people keep calling it imposter syndrome. I don't like that. And I'm not saying it's not that. I'm just saying I don't like that term because that term means something very specific. Imposter syndrome is kind of like, I don't know if it's official or if it's unofficially official, but it means something very specific. I don't like using the word imposter syndrome because I don't think imposter syndrome is specific to being an imposter on one thing. I think the core problem with myself, or I know the core problem is a lack of self-worth. A lack of self-worth. And the lack of self-worth came from childhood, as I've already explained. So I didn't feel worthy enough. Who am I to come out with a book? Who am I to say anything about anything? I just had this fundamental feeling of not having value, or I had things to say. I just didn't feel like I should be the one to say it, because who am I to we're talking about medical stuff. I didn't go to college. I barely graduated high school. So I put all these limitations on myself. Oh, if I say this, I don't have this credential, I don't have that credential, which now is starting to sound like imposter syndrome. But I think it's more fundamental than that. I think it's just an overall lack of self-worth, combined with something else that I want to put out, which I think is very important. And that is, especially my old unit, we're really bad at it. But for some reason, there's this, some guys put this label on themselves. And I just had a conversation with a guy, I won't drop his name, but he was a former SEAL. I was just talking to him yesterday about this.
He's probably a douche.
Well, we were talking about, he was like, I know it's all about, being a silent professional. I go, oh, no, it's not. He's like, what? What do you mean? I go, no. You just said silent professional. And that's not what we were ever intended to be. We were supposed to be quiet ones, not silent ones. And words are important. Words mean something. And you really got to take that and dissect it. We were supposed to be quiet professionals. We were never intended to be silent ones. You will never be able to help out anyone else if you're silent. You should be quiet and not, overly heroize yourself, or not be, the guy that's talking about how great they were. But you shouldn't be silent. If you are silent, you will never be able to use your story to others won't be able to identify with you, and you won't be able to identify with others. So I had to come to terms with that. And I had to come to terms with, who am I to put out my story? Well, I don't know, but it's my story. And the reason the point that I'm making is, I had all these ideas on what I thought it was. Okay, I learned all this shit. But the only way to put out what I learned, because again, I'm not a doctor, I don't have a degree in anything. I can't say, well, clinically, technically, scientifically, I can only put out my truth and the lessons that I learned from my truth. I can't believe I said my truth, because I hate that term.
Yeah, that was the thing.
Well, it's my truth.
We're holding space.
Hold space.
We're holding space
for me. So
Maybe your story.
yeah, but I was like, you know what? No one can disagree with my story. No one can say that's not how you felt. No, it is how I felt. So I was like, I'm going to use my story. I'm going to come up with my story. I'm going to put out my reality and what I've experienced, and then the lessons that I've learned from my experience. And that's me, and that's my story. And if you identify with anything I went through and the lesson that I learned from it, then awesome. And if not, well, then you're just reading, a version of what I experienced, and maybe hopefully you can extrapolate lessons from that in your own life. But really, I wasn't comfortable about putting out my story, but I just realized that was the only way to connect with people, was by putting out mine and being comfortable, even though I was not comfortable with it. It's the only way I was going to be able to put out the ideas I had was I had to tie them from where those ideas came from experientially in my life.
Fair.
And I was just going to say, but as a writer, you talked about your hesitations, but when you went for it, I mean, I worked with a lot of people. I've written, I'm working on number 13 as far as books right now. And when he went all in, he went all in. And I mean, he was really willing to talk about everything. And he was willing to really be honest in ways, I think it's easy to say, hey, you want to be transparent. I want to be raw. I want to be this. I want to be that. But he really had the ability to actually go there and talk about every area of life, not just combat experiences, but dating and relationships, talk about sex, talk about, relationship, work, drinking, so many things. And that gave us the ability, I think, to weave a story in which we could actually immerse somebody into his mind. And we wrote it in present tense. And so for some people, this is kind of writer speak. Okay, what does that mean? Instead of past tense. So most books are written, and so it's you now reflecting and talking about what happened then. So you kind of can neatly package your experiences. For this book, we did something different, which is we write in present tense. So you are in Tyler's mind as everything is happening at the moment. And we really challenged, and it was a challenge for me and myself as a writer to write only what was going through his head at the time. And we even say this in the book, like if you read a scene and he sounds like an asshole, it's probably because he was at the time. And we intentionally wrote the thoughts to look this way. If you see him, his self-talk to himself, damaging himself with self-destructive thoughts, it's because that's what was going on his mind at the time. So our goal is to really provide fast pace, but also the raw reality of what you would think, how you would feel, the lens in which you could see the world, the lies you tell yourself, all of it at the time.
Without the benefit of
hindsight so that you walk the full journey. So at the end, we were talking about all this kind of almost clinical sounding things that we kind of get to then. But first, you take the full journey and through it all.
Which is fascinating because it doesn't sound
all
like
her idea, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah, well,
the present tense was all her.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great because it gets rid of the reflection with rose-colored glasses.
Right. That's the whole point.
And that's why she explained it to me. I was like, that's why we're working together, because you're a great storyteller and a great writer. And it made I would argue, in my opinion, the book is what it is because of that choice that she made to tell it in first person. Because you can see where you're going to read it and you're like, oh, he's fucking up. He's fucking up right now. And again, yes, but I didn't know it then. And you're going to read things where I'm saying to myself, and I think I'm doing the right thing, but the reader's going to be like, oh my God, this is such an obvious mistake. But I didn't know it then.
It's like watching the shitty horror film. Like, what the fuck are you doing?
What are you doing?
Don't go in the basement.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Let's hide behind the chainsaws. So here's a question specifically for you, Lauren, if you don't mind. As we'll call it the curator of the story, if you could kind of package it in almost a summary of the table of contents and just kind of generally walk us through the book.
Yeah. So we start in a traffic jam in Fallujah. We'll just call it that way. An interesting set of events that takes place there. And then immediately go to switching scenes. And we see Tyler with a female. We see him in a dating scenario, picking somebody up, navigating. And I wanted that because a lot of books, they start with training. And, I think it's been done a lot. First of all, I wanted you to see, because, he goes through a lot of iterations of his character. You're going to see a ton of character development. And for a while, you see this fracturing of identity. You see him losing touch with that feeling of that superhero that he once was. And actually, I think Tyler in his humility was like, hey, we can just start at the part where I'm really kind of down, And I was like, no, first, let's see you kind of at the full glory stage. Let's see you when how you were operating at that time, both relationally and, the way in active, choices that you're making and the scenarios you're making them in. And so we open there. We also go through his childhood, the makings of a warrior, and actually specifically some of what we've talked about, the split of the warrior and the destroyer. We go into the inception of the very situations in which this takes place, And then we have some, I think some stories he told, that were very interesting to me of some dangerous scenarios, taking down a V-bid maker, which was a very interesting story. And then, of course, I think many people, anyone who's listened to a podcast, very defining moment, explosion.
Linked on his,
And the way Tyler said it to me, which I laughed the first time, he's like, well, that's, when my arm turned to raw hamburger meat. And I was like, well, that's a way to say it, and he was just really matter of fact about it. And then really it starts to go into the aftermath of it. It goes into the aftermath of, specifically first some of the medical stuff you're walking through and navigating that. And then the whole aftermath that takes place, in which now the chaotic environment, where I was, now I don't have that anymore. So then you start seeing him need to create the chaos, and that takes many different forms. We do follow some significant relationships, and there's parts of that. There's some moments in there, and he was very, very honest about, I think the sex and dating is something that everyone kind of knows and it will refer to. But in storytelling, I think, it hasn't been really illuminated.
Yeah, I'm just going to mention it because I think it's worth mentioning. I mean, look, I had a severe sex addiction. And when you say sex addiction, I don't mean like cool sex addiction. I mean, it's not cool. It's very shameful. And it's not really an addiction to sex. And we get into it in the book. Like I had, severe pornography addiction. I think those issues are way more common in the military than people think they are or will admit to. And so it was very important to me that we talk about this issue that I had. And I was addicted to female, what's the word? Approval. Sorry. Yeah. I was addicted. I thought sex addiction was I like sex. No, I was addicted to, I was bouncing from girl to girl because I needed their validation. That felt like a
desire addiction.
No, it's an addiction to
so it's a low self-worth.
It's a low
self-worth.
Needing to be desired.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, it's seeking validation because of I have no internal self-worth, so I need validation from other people to give me a feeling that I have worth. So for me, it was women. The more, and again, there's reasons that we cover in the book where that came from. I didn't really seek validation from men, but I absolutely sought it from women. Subconsciously. Obviously, I didn't know that at the time. And we cover that pretty significantly in the book because I think it's a much more common issue than most people are willing to acknowledge.
If I may interrupt, I'm curious. Did you get into why there's such a disparity between seeking and needing validation from women versus men? Is it because as a CAG guy, you already have so much validation from male counterparts and other men in society, or was there more to it than that?
No, we think there's more to it. It's really...
Is there a simple answer or not really?
Simple answer, it's childhood based.
Oh, okay.
I think most boys now are raised by women.
Yeah.
Societal, like how many percentage of your teachers were women versus men? Now look at, and then remove it. High school, go to elementary and junior high school. It's like 85% of your formative years are spent with female teachers. My dad was always gone. I never spent any time with them. My mom was kind of gone generally too. But by and large, I think little boys today are largely raised by women, and we are raised to seek approval from women because that's how women raise us. Not intentionally negatively, women generally raise boys to be the opposite of their fathers. And that has actually a lot of damage. And again, we get into this in the book, but that has a lot of damaging effect on young boys.
Would you say that that's across the board or only in situations where there's like a father wound?
Well, I'm going to go as far to say I think the vast majority of military people have a father wound.
Like the women who are raising boys or young men to be the opposite of their fathers, is it in every instance or only when it's a negative experience? I would imagine it's only negative, but it sounds more broad than that.
I mean, we go into the societal part of it, but I think, again, I don't think women are intending to do it, but so again, this is very oversimplified, but I would say in general, a woman gets a young boy, and a woman goes, okay, I'm going to raise this young boy, his father's kind of an asshole. So I'm going to raise him to be a really good boy. And specifically, I'm going to raise him to be good and I'm going to raise him to be a good boy and good and respectful to women. There's only one problem with that. That's not what women want.
You're saying generally speaking, or
Oh, it's demonstrable. Okay. If
would
women,
you agree with that?
I don't know. Well, you got to see where he's going.
if women, so I was a good boy. Okay. I was a good kid. I was very respectful to women. I was a great kid, very, very, very good to women. And it got me 0 girlfriends and 0 female attention. I was friend zoned immediately. Women want some level of friction. And again, this is the difference is I think women are going off of what they consciously want, not what they actually want. So again, if you are nice to women, you will be immediately friend zoned. I was nice to women. I was in the friend zone. When I created an alternate character who was an asshole, which by the way, that's not who I was. That's who I created. That creation character, and again, I experienced this firsthand, suddenly got a ton of attention from women, got girlfriends, etc. So in my experience,
But I would venture to say that's toxic compatibility going on from both ends. I think you've got a female with a wound and a guy, and now you're finding toxic compatibility. I think there's a healthy version in which I think respect should always be there in a healthy way. But I think probably there's just an alternate word I would describe.
Well, I guess I would ask you, can you define what being good, your version of
Yeah,
what being good?
that might help.
yeah, well, I mean, I think, I think the good word that I was looking for is, again, a woman. Women are raising young boys to seek female approval. And again, women don't want men who seek their approval. They want men who do what they want for themselves. They want men who take care of themselves. That's what women are attracted to. Women are not attracted to a man who puts them ahead of themselves.
Well, I would agree with that. I think where there may be some confusion to somebody listening is attaching the word good because it's
Or respect, yeah.
It's an arbitrary term. But I'm saying, but that's again, it's like, for every girl, how many girls are talking about, God, I wish there was just a good guy out there.
Yeah.
That girl has at least 2 dudes that are great, good guys in the friend zone that they have absolutely no sexual attraction.
But it may not, I think it could be a masculinity thing. I think you could be a very good, but high masculinity would be attractive. Would you say?
Yeah, but so again, I'm going off of my personal experience. My personal experience was as a child, I suppressed my masculinity to seek approval because I thought, I didn't think that's what I was taught women wanted. I was taught by women to seek women's approval. Okay, you need to be you need to be. It's like overly
submissive.
I guess submissive. I mean, yeah, if you think of it in a different way, you could say, but seeking approval is a level of submission. And I hate the term. Literally, one of my least favorite terms is alpha male. I hate that term. It's been disproven, the whole alpha wolf thing. It's like, that's old.
Well, I'm there with you because in the dog training world, they just throw it around more.
People throw it around, and it's based on debunked science. So that's all there is to it. So.
But I think some of it too is that there's because we're saying the way that women raise young boys, but I think some of it is just a side effect of less present, really positive
absolutely.
Male role models.
100%.
So it's kind of that's who's left to get the approval from, because that's who's there. Like some of it could be intentional. I think some of it is just that's what you got, And so there is that need for more positive male role models.
Yeah. Boys need to grow up they need to see both sides. And if they're just stuck with the feminine side, they're not going to and again, because I was raised with just the feminine side, I didn't really see the masculine side. And so I presented the side that I was raised with and taught to go with. And then now again, making no mistake, I fully am saying here that the general effect that guys that grew up that way have is they get denied, and then they go, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to be an asshole. And then they go the 180-degree opposite. I did.
Which we personify in the book, Warrior and Destroyer.
Yeah.
And that Destroyer side has a full side with sex and dating and women.
And then it works, and you go, that's what they want. And so for years, I went down the asshole path. Now I'm finally at a place where I'm me. I'm a very nice, respectful guy to my girlfriend. I treat her great, but I'm a man, but it took me years to understand what that meant.
Yeah.
And it took me, and again, what the book arguably is about, if I said it very simply, is I was a very soft, nice, sensitive kid. There's no question about that. You know that. You wrote the book. And I suppressed my inner warrior. I suppressed my inner masculinity. I did all those things because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And it made me miserable. Then I went, oh, this is making me miserable. Oh, I'm going to break out of this and I'm going to go 180-degree opposite. And then that asshole I created, which by the way is the destroyer. Now, that destroyer is getting the attention from girls that I wanted. It's getting everything that I wanted. Then that lasted me for years, probably over a decade, until I got hurt. And the mask that I had created, this operator that was, had a ton of attention from women, that died the day that I got hurt. And I suddenly lost my physical aptitude. I lost, half of my right arm. I lost all those things. And that mask that I had created, that identity, that fake fractured, or that destroyer mask that I'd been wearing for years was suddenly broken. I could never put it back on again. And then I had to go, all right, I'm not that, and I can never be that again. And then I went, well, who am I? And it took me years. And what the book, I would argue, chronicles is that, but also then the years that I spent figuring out who I was. And by the way, I had to figure out, oh, by the way, I was never that mask.
Can I ask, when you turned into the asshole version of yourself, we'll call it maybe an overcorrection of the pushover.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
The type of women that you were attracting at that point, were they
chaotic?
But would a similarity or a parallel with all of them be that they had a traumatic father wound?
100%.
Okay.
Yes.
So to me, I guess I would say from a theory standpoint is that just like what we've outlined in terms of the growing up in a chaotic environment as it relates to men who join the military, you could argue that that exact same thing happens with young girls that have a traumatic father wound, that they're rewiring, and now they're attracted to shitty men who are dickheads.
We talked about this a lot too, that
there's soldiers and strippers. Like there's a reason it's a cliche, right? There's a reason it's a cliche.
And I think not that you're asking, but it makes me think of it. I don't think it's one or the other. I think you can be a nice, respective man who also has boundaries and principles.
Oh, yeah,
100%.
And I think that's the happy medium.
Yeah, but it took me years
going so far the other way.
Yeah, because I didn't know that, when you're some way and it's not working, kind of the obvious logic is, well, just do the exact opposite of what's not working. And, one of the sayings from a guy named Dr. Robert Glover is, the opposite of crazy is still crazy. The opposite of the complete opposite of something that isn't working is probably something that's also not going to work. Yeah. But it took me years to find a middle ground it took me years. The easiest way to say it is it took me years to find, because I didn't know, it took me years to find who I really was. It took me years to find my authentic self.
And who is that?
At my core, I won't define myself because I think it's ridiculous. I don't think whatever you think about yourself is generally like.
I guess to say that you found yourself. Who is that you found?
The way I've settled now is, I know who I am and I know that I'm a warrior. I don't rake myself on the warrior scale because comparison with anyone else is ridiculous. But I know that if you push me, I'm going to push back. Now, maybe you're a guy that can push back harder, and that's fine. There's no competition between us and that. I just know I'm a guy that'll push back. And that's who I am. And everything in my life, I now accept. And again, I have many flaws. I have many things that I do poorly and a million things I have to work on. But at my core, I know that I am a warrior, and I accept that I will fight forever to be a better person. I know that's debatably my most innate quality.
So is that kind of how the book wraps up, is chronicling that and then ending on kind of you refining?
Kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, we go through a good portion. I would say the first probably 3/4 is storytelling.
Yeah.
Again, present tense, first person. Then we get into the anatomy of a warrior, really getting into the natural characteristics of what a warrior is. Then we talk about the fractured
Or what we're defining it as.
what we're defining it as. That's true.
Yeah.
And then getting into the fractured warrior, actually talking about the environments that forge warriors, that, that forged in chaos element to it.
Yeah. Warrior destroyer.
Then we talk about the war within, actually what that is and really breaking it down. And then the whole, end really takes into creating a war plan for life, which is if there's a war within. And now that we're able to actually bring that out of the shadows into the lights, get clarity on what it is actually taking place. Now, how do you build a personal war plan for life? And then we go into some, and he used some things from his background that, are really interesting of how to break it down, mindset and techniques, and how to actually assess the enemy, but when it's within, actually, to be able to see where, those strongholds are and how that's taking place in your life, where those patterns continue to stay rooted. And so, because we wrote it and it was very theoretical at first, but then we really challenged ourselves to say, like, we don't want to just be another voice that diagnoses the problem, raises awareness without an action. And so I will say it's the beginning of a conversation. 100%. I would say there's so much more coming here, not in just the writing that we're doing, but in other platforms and ventures that we're working on to actually create actionable things that will, because we're not here just to talk about it. We're here to, hey, let's roll up
initiate change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So that kind of catapults us into the organization that you guys are looking at starting, that kind of does a soup to nuts, all things encompassed approach to tackling this. So I guess to that second question that I had a few minutes ago, which is, if somebody approaches this process, can you guys articulate how you would walk them through the kind of the initial part of the analysis and, defining what the issue is and how you walk through whether it's LTSD, PTSD, and then ultimately like how you're trying to treat that?
Yeah. I think we here in the States have a pretty compartmentalized and fragmented way that we see the body and the mind. And we view the body and mind as very separate. So you go to, psychiatry if you need psychological help, and then you go to physical. And again, when we first began, what surprised you? The psychophysiology piece. So really what we're looking to do is to create full integration, because there's a lot of things that need to happen actually simultaneously, where you are working on all the systems of the body, plus you're also working on the mindset together. And so that's what we're really working on, is to be able to take a person, be able to look at all the physical aspects of things, whether it's, hormonals or adrenals, whether it's nervous system, all of that kind of stuff. Also look and assess, we lay out a lot of the I would say more mental side of things in the book, but it's really a culmination of them together. But, we have in the conventional medical system where, you kind of go to specialists who specialize in a lot of different things, but it's like they don't share notes. Your thyroid person isn't really talking to person over here, and you go to some for childhood trauma, but no one's really checking on your testosterone levels, So it's like for the person trying to actually gain traction, it's like you're just going through this trial and error process. You're throwing stuff. And by the way, when you get to alternative therapies, which we have a lot more, I would say, even in the past few years that are popping up, amazing people usually heading up, and they're very passionate about what they do, and they specialize again in it. And so they know that, hey, if you just do this one thing, if you just ice bath and work out in the morning, it's going to change your life. Hey, if you just get psychedelics. Hey, if you just, change your food and diet and get functional medicine. Hey, if you just do CrossFit, whatever it is. And in all of them, you could arguably say, yeah, you're right. There's some people getting amazing benefits. The key again, comprehensive, integrated, personalized. How do you take someone, and there's process we're working on to actually assess, look at not just biomarkers or using testing, also look at the story, also understand the history, what led you up to here, what you're doing. then to be able to put together something that sequences and combines all the modalities that we have available now. And there is a lot. There's SGB treatment that can reset the nervous system, as we've talked about. There's, some people find help with somatic breath work. And as he said, actually different people are different, and some you'll meet someone and they had an amazing psychedelic experience. Someone else, it's like, man, it was terrible. So there is a way to actually create some things that maybe open the door, other things help you walk through it. And so that's the main thing, that we've seen is doing that. And then we're both, continuing to, how can we develop, and the book is one of them. We could probably write 6 more books, right now based on what we did. So we want to also continue to push the conversation forward. And I would say not just conversation.
We already have another half book of more detail.
Yes. Then I wrote a bunch and had to cut a lot out. So we also, I think simultaneously, we're working to create that in a sense where actually that's available to people, but then, simultaneously continuing to work, not just to raise awareness or lead the conversation. I would say to try help facilitate a paradigm shift in actually how we see the body. And I would say, I hope all of society in the States begins to embrace a new and better way. And I think we may be on the cusp of seeing some good changes where health is concerned in our nation, but I think it's a big part of it to stop seeing the body as fragmented and to see the body all together in a sense of responsibility. And that's a big one we want to do, which is, I think we've been taught to and doctors are amazing people. Absolutely. I have doctor friends that are just incredible healers and helpers. But I think we almost outsource and we give up the sense of responsibility over our own bodies, and even understanding of our own bodies to another person becomes almost like a god. And so our hope is that through education and action taking, the message too is, this is your body. This is your story. This is your health.
No one should know your health better than you.
And you, And
you are responsible. Not another system, not another organization, not a doctor. You are the expert on your health, and your ability to communicate your situation and everything almost directly dictates your results.
I remember when we had Dr. Lipoff on, he mentioned I don't think it was quite there yet, or it's not quite there yet, but an actual diagnosis from a chemical present in, I think it's the cerebral spinal fluid, where there's an actual chemical reaction to trauma-based stress, like in your brain, there's a chemical present. And so they can scientifically determine, yes, you have PTSD, or in this case.
There's a lot more coming out now that we can see.
So in
advanced brain scans
in that same vein, would there be a difference between LTS and PTS in terms of that test in particular? That
we need some tests on it.
The short answer, I'll say this: I believe LTSD is currently provable, and I believe more data will be continuing to be developed, which is, to me, again, I came out with the LTSD concept in 2008, whatever it was. To me, it is proven if you test a person, which they can do this, it just that, obviously I made up the name, but if you test somebody's nervous system, and as a child, that nervous system stopped producing the ability to uptake dopamine and started to put those efforts toward hypervigilance and several other things. To me, that right there is chemically, that's LTSD. That's what it is.
Right.
And so what we're doing, the way I see what we're doing, is the problem with the medical system is this. You have an issue, okay? You see Lauren and you see me. We're both doctors. She gives you an opinion. I give you an opinion. We want to take the opinion out of the diagnosis.
Sure.
We want to use quantifiable data to say, look, here is data. Here's all these different tests that you do. We want to take all of that data, look at it in ways that it hasn't been looked at before, and quantify it in ways it hasn't been quantified before, and give definitive modalities based on your data that based on this will work for you.
No, I'm tracking 100% on that. I guess now that I remember the discussion with Dr. Lipoff, that I think if I remember correct, he said that it was a certain, not just a presence, but a certain level of norepinephrine in cerebral spinal fluid that said, yes, you, but I guess what I'm curious is LTS and PTS, do they have that same threshold of it needs to be a level of this? So would, like scientifically or chemically, would you diagnose them as the same condition, even though the origins behind it may be different?
I don't think, I think the short answer is, you know, we don't know. We're not at the point yet, but I'll say this, and because I haven't explained it this way. And again, this is all stuff I made up. This is not, you know, definitive. There's no white paper on it yet, but I believe that PTSD, the basis to me for PTSD is a normal nervous system based on a non-chaotic childhood environment. So if you have a non-chaotic childhood environment, then something, you know, boom, you're this old, then something severely traumatic happens to you. Based on that baseline, now you have post-traumatic stress disorder because your baseline, you were not wired for chaos. Conversely, so to that point, if it's pure chaos, I don't believe I can't personally, I firmly believe, and I think you'll agree, I can't have PTSD from just chaos in itself, because chaos doesn't freak me out at all. It calms me. So I can't have the same reaction physically. So I believe that PTSD and LTSD are opposite sides of the same coin based on either a chaotic or a non-chaotic childhood environment.
Yeah, I get.
And I believe chemicals, I think once we start to study that, I believe there will be a chemical way or a scientific way to prove both based on those factors. It just doesn't currently exist.
But it sounds like the way that you're, like the neurons or synapses in your brain would activate, that they would be opposite.
I mean,
is that
that's
like,
what I believe.
LTS would be maybe an absence, like with the absence of chaos, they're too high. If you throw somebody into chaos, they get to a normal range. The opposite would be true of PTS.
Yeah, theoretically, I mean, again, no one's done it, but theoretically, I'm pretty confident that theoretically there's going to be a way to definitively, chemically or whatever, show the two variations. And again, I've used the term rewired for a long time now. So I've always felt it was that. And again, when I say the word felt, I mean, I felt it in my body, and that's why I've been using that term. So then when all this new science came out, I'm like, well, there you go. Like it. So, and again, this, you know, don't let, you know, when she was saying you're in charge of your health, you know, I mean, I was told I was wrong for quite a long time about this. And now I know that there's some level of truth backing up the concept. And so it always comes back to if something just doesn't feel right, and I'm talking any medical thing, it just keeps like that. They say it's this, they say it's this. I just doesn't fit or doesn't feel that way. It's up to you to keep pushing, and you have to. No one knows your health better or your body better than you. I don't give a shit what doctors like. I know my health better than they do, period. I can tell you how I feel better than you can tell me how I feel. And so if you feel something innately is not right, or you just don't agree with it, keep pushing, because that's your responsibility based on, don't let someone else convince you of something just because you may not have the credentials or the background or the education. I think you have to go with your gut, and you just have to have, again, you just, when pushed, push back harder.
And unfortunately, we've seen, though, that a lot of amazing individuals from the medical community are also pushing forward in a movement. And obviously not all, but it's been actually really great to see.
Dr. Liploff's a great example.
Yeah. And his book's coming out later this year. I wrote it as well, that really specializes in nervous system reset and actually explaining from a doctor's perspective. Yeah. And so I think that's the good news too, is it's not just like, hey, this is a fringe thing. There's enough people with enough, coming in from collective backgrounds to really say like, hey, let's create a new way that we see health in the body.
Yeah. Now there is.
Now there is. And I would say even quite recently, even
very recently, within 2 years, it's things are changing
significantly.
From a treatment standpoint, after diagnosis, are the collective we at a point where the treatment for LTS and PTS, are they vastly different? Or are they similar? Are they the same?
I don't think we're at the point where
you can make the
where we can make.
But I think if you begin to regulate, so nervous system dysregulation in any form is always going to cause a cascading effects. But if you can, just get the major systems of the body, get your nervous system regulated once again. You can make sure your hormonal health is on track, check the adrenals, get that gut-brain connection going really well. So get all that stuff, simultaneously work on the fractured identity, the low sense of self-worth, find your purpose again where you're doing this. When you start to put all that together, I think it's less about the question. And I hope we see more data to know with specificity, and maybe there are some nuances in treatment, but I would say we've got a lot of work to do just to get a human being with a regulated nervous system, with a healthy gut, with, hormonal health that's doing great. If there's TBI or something like that, that's being talked about, is being treated very well and supported. Society who understands what's going on, coupled with the mental. I mean, we're going to be making a massive stride if we have a lot to tackle there. And hopefully simultaneously, I think more research will come out about that specific one.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, having a chaotic childhood, which is not your fault. It really is it's an unbelievable, it's an almost unbelievable amount of work that's just being thrust on you for choices that had nothing to do with you. And yeah, it can be frustrating because the term I use, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Yeah.
So it's your responsibility to change it. And it's a lot of work. And I mean, I work on self-worth. I work on self-worth every single day. Why? Because my default mode that was etched in my brain as a child was, you're not worth it. So I have to reverse that message every single day. If not, I'm prone to go back to old wiring. So it's make no mistake, it's daily work. And it's just, again, talking about fighting addiction. It's tough. But if you do the work, the results are there.
And I will say this too, and I can say this for myself, having dealt with childhood trauma, and then getting to work alongside a lot of incredible people. I mean, I've told the stories, a lot of warriors. I've also worked with billionaires, former prime ministers, world leaders, and I get to really see the back end of their story. And I will say that adversity, and even what we would classify as trauma, is actually often the catalyst that creates some of the most incredible human beings. And so while he's saying it's a lot of work, and I know the same has been true for myself, and there's times it's difficult, I think there's also, when you can come to the place of seeing that adaptation is also a gift, understanding that you have something really significant that you can contribute to others and to society, there is a deep sense of purpose. And if you're able to find that, it's not saying it's easy, the road is easy, but I will say that sometimes the people who do the most extraordinary things, they had very uncommon environment that forged that adaptation, that made them into that. And so I think that's something too, is not just to say oh man, you're messed up. It's to also say that that's part of what makes you an amazing protector and warrior. It has something that is extraordinary, that is different, that is unique, is that. And so I would add that piece into, yes, it's a lot of work, but it's also a tremendous gift. And I can say that as having worked with a lot of amazing people I think would be surprised. I think, we call success as if it's you're just this person and then this event takes place and now you became successful, or you have someone here and they save someone's life. Now they're a hero. Where events really just illuminate who you already were. I don't believe success is so much of an event that takes place, but an identity. And those who create an identity that these extraordinary circumstances illuminate it, that was forged long before the event ever took place. And oftentimes in very adverse or perhaps traumatic circumstances.
So it's kind of like money.
It's a magnifier.
Exaggerates who you are.
Yeah, it's a magnifier. The other, you know, I don't know, I'll say this, but I just love this saying, you know, it's what's the difference between a superhero and a villain's origin story? Nothing. They're both tragic origins. One just went towards the hero or the warrior, and one went towards the destroyer. Yeah. And so the without the tragic origin story, there is no superhero or supervillain. It's you know, it's just averageness. So it's like, yes, in a way, that tragic origin story or that tragedy, those events, all those bad things that happen, that is actually what is forging.
Just dropping the name of the book in there. Forging.
The ability to be the superhero. And again, I'm not saying I'm a superhero, but well, what is a superhero really, actually? I mean, you know, I would argue what makes a superhero in comic books. I love comic books. I collected as a kid. It's really not powers. It's the difference between a superhero and a supervillain is not their powers. It's helping others and hurting others. And so what makes someone, what's that?
That's how they use them.
It's how they use them. But the critical part is helping others is the definitive quality. Like what makes a hero a hero? Helping others. I would argue that's the definitive title or the definitive characteristic. And so, you know, I look at my life experience, and I had to look at it for this book as, okay, I want to help people. This is what I have. This is what I've been given that I think I can use to help others.
One thing I would say is it's for the individual who maybe identifies with the subject matter, but it's also really our hope that, and it was for me specifically, maybe as a female, that I don't know if enough has been really talked about for people who love a warrior, especially if it's a woman and the man is, you know, the masculine is the one who's a warrior, to really understand the internal workings of the mind. It was really fascinating for me to get a window into others. And even as we explored the sex and dating, there's behaviors in which you could see that as a female, to me, we're like, that's an asshole, that's not good. But actually, it doesn't perhaps make it excusable, but a sense of understanding of where the origin came from. My hope is that this is also going to be something that if you love a warrior, if you're dating a warrior, if you're married to a warrior, that you're able to actually really understand. And this could be from whether that's in a romantic connection sense or a son or a friend or something, hopefully broaden the conversation. Because I think also if everyone has a sense of understanding of what's going on, the physiology, some of the nervous system dysregulation, some of the things, some of the behaviors, it's going to be, you know, at least destigmatified in a way to make a positive conversation about it. And then sometimes I think, especially if you're getting into the romance and dating part, I think there's a self-blame then a lot of women have that if this behavior is going on, now it touches on my sense of self-worth. It means that I've done something, I'm not enough, or I'm not attractive, I'm not this and that. So then that's a whole thing that causes you to have a sense. And so sometimes I think the ability to understand where something's come from, again, if it's, you know, a behavior that perhaps inexcusable, doesn't condone it. But I think it just allows for hopefully a much better conversation about, you know, some things that have been kind of taboo up until now, but he was willing to share. So again, I think for individuals, but also hopefully for a broader sense of anyone who has someone, you know, in their life, you know, who's a warrior.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Knowledge applied correctly is power. Knowledge by itself is
That's
power.
well said. Yeah.
Forged in Chaos. When does it come out?
We're going to have pre-orders open here very soon.
Pre-orders should be coming up soon. Forged in Chaos. You know, you can obviously find me on Instagram at Tyler A. Gray.
Lauren Ungeldi, LaurenUngeldi.
It could also be available on Post Hill Press. Okay. Awesome. Post Hill's the publisher.
All right. Well, great seeing both of you again. Can't thank you enough for taking such a deep dive into something that I would say plagues our society, especially as it relates to the veteran community.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So I appreciate all the hard work, the in-depth discussion. I hope you enjoyed it, carving the time out. If you didn't enjoy it, you know, you can choke yourself. Thanks for coming again, and until next time, this is Mic Drop.